Imagine a land stretching beyond sight, endless horizons beneath an enormous sky. This was the American West in the late 1800s, a place of breathtaking beauty, yes, but also a landscape that demanded everything from those who dared to call it home. What drove people to seek fortune, or simply a new life, in such a harsh and unforgiving environment? The idea of the frontier wasn't just geography, it was woven into the fabric of American identity. Yivro for Nalifa, it represented opportunity, freedom, and expansion. This line, constantly shifting westward, defined where civilization ended and the wild began. But what did that truly mean for those living on its edge? The West wasn't empty, it was claimed by many. Homesteaders dreamed of fertile fields, cattle ranchers sought grazing land, miners chased the glint of gold, and the Lakota Sioux, whose ancestral lands were caught in this relentless tide. What would happen when these visions clashed? Life on the homestead wasn't romantic, it was backbreaking labor from sunrise to sunset, battling drought and loneliness. Sarah's letters paint a vivid picture of that reality, a constant struggle just to survive. Howard Ray, "Dear Mother," she wrote, "the dust is relentless, and I miss you terribly." How much could one young woman endure? Then came the Homestead Act of 1862, a bold promise, 160 acres of free land to anyone willing to cultivate it. Yeah, the government hoped this would spur westward expansion, populate those vast territories. But did it truly offer a fresh start, or simply another layer of complexity? News of gold in the Black Hills ignited an irresistible rush. Suddenly, those rugged peaks weren't just a scenic backdrop, they were a promise of riches, a siren song drawing people from all corners of the nation. But this land wasn't unclaimed. The Lakota Sioux considered it sacred ground, and their claims would be ignored. Boom towns exploded almost overnight, places like Deadwood, South Dakota. Lawless, chaotic, yet filled with the intoxicating scent of opportunity. Saloons overflowed, fortunes were made and lost in a single night. Could any society truly thrive in such an environment? The reality was often far harsher than the promises. Crop failures, disease outbreaks, isolation gnawing at their spirits. Descendants remember stories of hardship, families struggling just to survive against the elements and each other. What price were they truly paying for this dream? Then came silver, discovered in Nevada, sparking another frenzy. Speculators and entrepreneurs flocked west, eager to strike it rich quickly. This wasn't about farming or building a life. It was about taking advantage of the boom. But booms rarely last forever. "Dear Mother," Sarah wrote again, her voice laced with worry. "The drought continues, and now the grasshoppers are coming. They've eaten half our wheat crop." Was this dream worth it? Had they made a terrible mistake venturing west? The land itself seemed to fight back. These weren't just photographs, they were defiant testaments. Cheyenne warriors, faces painted for battle, stood their ground against a relentless tide. Apache scouts, masters of the desert terrain, melted into the shadows. The Sioux fiercely protected their ancestral hunting grounds. They knew what was coming, a collision course between two worlds, one rooted in tradition, the other driven by expansion. What fueled this relentless march westward? It wasn't just about opportunity or gold, it was an idea called manifest destiny. Could a nation truly believe it was destined to control an entire continent? The belief that America had a divine right, a God-given duty to expand its borders, that justification became the bedrock for displacing countless Native American tribes. What price progress, really? The accounts are jarring, raw. Soldiers wrote of skirmishes, often born from misunderstandings and cultural divides they couldn't bridge. One soldier described a raid gone horribly wrong. Another, the quiet dignity in the eyes of an elder surrendering his village. It wasn't always about conquest, but it almost always ended that way. How do you reconcile those perspectives? How did fear and prejudice shape history? Then came the Iron Horse, the transcontinental railroad. A symbol of progress, yes, but also devastation. It sliced across the landscape like a scar, connecting east and west in record time. But what did it cost? Suddenly buffalo herds were disrupted, traditional hunting grounds vanished, trade routes evaporated. How quickly does a nation change when steel rails begin to crisscross its heartland? Just imagine the scale of it all. Before the railroad, crossing the continent could take months. Now, weeks. Families packed their belongings and headed west, lured by promises of fertile land and a fresh start. The dream of a better life seemed within reach for so many, but whose dreams were being trampled in the process. Life on the frontier wasn't just about hardship, it was also about finding moments of joy, however fleeting. Sarah, writing to her sister back east, describes a traveling medicine show rolling into town. It was quite the spectacle, singing and dancing. For just a few hours, we forgot all about the dust and the loneliness. But how long could those moments last? What happens when the entertainment packs up and moves on? The cattle drives, they were legendary, but legends often gloss over the brutal reality. Days without end under a scorching sun, pushing thousands of head of cattle across unforgiving terrain. Stampedes scattered entire herds and cost lives. It was backbreaking work, a constant battle against nature and exhaustion. What drove these men to endure such conditions? But that very industry created conflict. Ranchers needed land for their herds. Farmers needed land to plow. Disputes over grazing rights escalated quickly, sometimes into violence. Fences went up, dividing the landscape and fueling resentment. When does progress become a war of attrition? What happens when neighbors turn into adversaries? The shift was undeniable. Small family farms gave way to massive ranching operations, driven by profit and efficiency. The romantic ideal of the independent pioneer faded as corporations consolidated power. This wasn't about settling a land anymore, it was about controlling resources. How does an economy change when individual dreams are sacrificed at the altar of industry? And what of those whose voices were silenced? The Lakota elder remembers stories passed down through generations, broken treaties, forced relocation onto reservations, the bitter taste of betrayal. They promised us land, he says, but their promises were as empty as the prairie wind. What does it mean to lose your home, your culture, your very identity? How do you carry that pain forward? The late 1800s brought a radical shift in federal policy toward Native American tribes. The Dawes Act of 1887, intended to civilize and assimilate, declared tribal lands as belonging to the public domain. It proposed breaking up those communal holdings into individual parcels, allotting them to native families while declaring the surplus open for white settlement. Sounds good on paper, right? But in reality it stripped away crucial cultural structures and often left families with inadequate land, unable to support themselves, ultimately dispossessing many of their ancestral homes. Life wasn't exactly easy for homesteaders either. Sarah's letter paints a stark picture. The rains haven't come, she writes, and the bank is threatening foreclosure. Dust bowl conditions were becoming more common. Crops failing, debts mounting. It was a vicious cycle. Many families faced the agonizing choice: pack up everything and start over somewhere else, or stubbornly cling to a dream that seemed increasingly out of reach. What would Sarah's family decide? Boomtowns sprang up practically overnight: mining camps, railroad hubs, cattle towns. They were places of opportunity, sure, but also rife with chaos. Lawmen tell stories that are hard to believe: shootouts in the streets, claims jumping, and a general disregard for anything resembling justice. Officially, sheriffs and marshals tried to maintain order. Often they were outnumbered and outgunned by those who'd come seeking riches or anonymity. Then came barbed wire. Before, ranchers and homesteaders shared access to vital water sources: creeks, rivers, springs. But this simple invention changed everything. Suddenly those resources could be fenced off, effectively denying others access. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about controlling the lifeblood of the prairie, and that's when tensions really began to escalate. Across the territories, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico, a quiet movement was gaining momentum: statehood. These lands had been existing in a legal limbo, territories under federal control, but with this push for full representation, what did that mean for those living on the frontier? Would it bring stability or simply accelerate the changes already sweeping across the landscape? The Iron Horse was rapidly changing the face of the West, too. Railroads, fueled by government subsidies, sliced across the plains, connecting distant communities and bringing an influx of settlers. But the construction came at a cost. Native American populations were displaced further from their traditional hunting grounds, forced onto smaller reservations, their way of life irrevocably altered. Sarah's family watched as neighbors packed up their belongings and moved on. Another homestead abandoned to the relentless winds. The land, once so full of promise, seemed to offer nothing but hardship now. Even Sarah began to question whether they should leave too. Was it possible to endure this constant struggle, or were some dreams simply destined to fade away? Wiver pre-efrusion true pecan session pecan for comfortus repetition 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 pecan for comfortus repetition. It wasn't just individual struggles playing out here. Behind the scenes, powerful forces were at work. Land speculators and wealthy corporations, hungry for vast tracts of open range, were quietly exerting pressure, buying up land from desperate homesteaders. The lure of profit outweighed any sense of fairness or community, a silent tide reshaping the West. The simmering tensions finally boiled over. A group of Cheyenne warriors, led by a young man named Red Cloud, struck back against those who sought to dispossess them, raiding a train carrying wealthy investors. It was an act of defiance, a desperate plea for recognition and respect. A violent reminder that the fight for survival wasn't over. What would be the consequences? The response was swift and brutal. The U.S. Army mobilized, increasing its presence in the territories and initiating a series of skirmishes with Native American groups. What started as a struggle for land had become something far more dangerous, a conflict that would shape the final chapter of the American frontier. Was this the inevitable end? The frustration had been simmering for years. Promises of land, broken treaties. It all culminated in this moment in Oklahoma City. "We will not be silenced," one voice roared above the crowd, a defiant cry echoing across the square. Eat for Bruce, freedmen, descendants of those once enslaved, demanded what was rightfully theirs under Reconstruction. But the Dawes Act systematically dismantled their hopes, carving up communal lands into individual allotments, often leaving them with little or nothing. The fight wasn't just for land. It was for dignity. Then came the dust. Relentless, choking clouds blotted out the sun and swallowed farms whole. The Great Plains were being ravaged, the very earth turning against those who'd staked their lives on it. Years of intensive farming without proper soil conservation had stripped the land bare. When the winds picked up, they carried away more than just topsoil. They carried away dreams, livelihoods, futures. Families watched helplessly as their crops withered and died under a blanket of dust. Another blow to an already fragile existence. The Cheyenne Raid, and others like it, forced Washington's hand. A congressional inquiry was launched, probing the dealings of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. What they uncovered was shocking: a web of corruption, mismanagement, and outright theft. Officials were enriching themselves at the expense of Native American tribes, manipulating treaty negotiations and diverting funds meant for education and supplies. It wasn't just about broken promises. It was about deliberate betrayal, institutional failures on a grand scale. Sarah's father, ever optimistic, poured his remaining resources into a gamble, a new strain of drought-resistant wheat. He'd heard it could thrive even with little rain. But the rain simply didn't come. The seedlings withered, and hope evaporated along with them. It was then they knew. This wasn't just a setback, it was over. With heavy hearts, Sarah and her family began the long journey west, leaving behind the land that had once held so much promise. The consequences resonated far beyond individual losses. Broken treaties and forced assimilation had inflicted deep wounds on Native American communities, wounds that continue to fester today. The loss of language, culture, and traditional ways of life created a cycle of intergenerational trauma, passed down through families like a heavy inheritance. How could a nation reconcile its ideals with such a devastating legacy? Oklahoma became the 46th state, officially ending its status as Indian Territory and a symbolic moment, a closing chapter to one story, but the beginning of another for the land and its people. Statehood promised progress, opportunity, but at what cost? Could a new political order truly address the injustices of the past? Kansas City, a sprawling metropolis of brick and steel. Sarah's family arrived, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. The open sky they'd known seemed distant, replaced by towering buildings that blocked out the sun. This wasn't the frontier anymore. This was a world dominated by factories, railroads, and an unrelenting pace of life, reflecting a broader shift away from rural simplicity towards urban complexity. Decades later, an elderly rancher sits on his porch, gazing at the horizon. "The frontier isn't dead," he says quietly. "It lives on in our spirit," a testament to the enduring resilience of those who faced hardship and persevered, adapting, innovating, finding new ways to survive. The land may have changed, but the grit and determination of the pioneers remained a part of the American character. Time marched on, and nature began to reclaim what had been taken. Yehifuth, abandoned homesteads slowly succumb to the elements. Fields return to prairie, fences crumbled into dust. The land remembers, it always does. It patiently waits for humanity's footprint to fade, readying itself for a new cycle of growth and renewal. A powerful reminder of nature's enduring strength. Now fields and farms stretch as far as the eye can see, replacing the open ranges that once defined this land. The American frontier may be gone, but its legacy endures, woven into the fabric of our nation's identity. It shaped who we are, tested our limits, and challenged our ideals. But as we continue westward, pushing boundaries and seeking new horizons, what will be lost along the way?